Marcus Avery arrived at City Hall that brisk autumn morning with a single purpose: to present Meridian Hall, a transformative public pavilion he had spent 18 months designing, to the Planning Commission. Clutched in his hand was a sleek tablet, loaded with interactive 3D models, a soaring glass atrium, rooftop gardens watering urban wildlife, and a sweeping open plaza intended to heal the fractured downtown. He strode into the ornate boardroom, its high coffered ceiling and marble columns humming with civic gravitas, and set up his presentation. When the meeting convened, the chamber lights dimmed. Marcus took the podium, voice steady. Meridian Hall will be both beacon and bridge, he began, gesturing to the rendering of a sunlit courtyard, alive with farmers' markets and community concerts. Its cantilevered glass walls will flood the space with daylight. Its rainwater harvesting gardens will replenish our aquifer, and its open-air forum will host every neighborhood event, from youth art exhibitions to seniors' Tai Chi. Commissioners leaned forward as he walked them through interactive diagrams: solar shade canopies powering night market lights, modular seating for pop-up clinics, and acoustic canopies designed for whisper-quiet evening lectures. After 2 hours of technical questions on stormwater runoff, traffic patterns, and maintenance costs, Marcus expected applause. Instead, Chairwoman Langston announced a closed-door deliberation. When the vote was called, it was 5-2 against his proposal. The official finding: Meridian Hall's scale and aesthetic lack sufficient contextual fit with the district's historic character. Commissioners offered measured nods, their regret perfunctory. Never once did they mention the whispered doubts he'd overheard, that a black architect could not fully appreciate the city's heritage. As he packed his drawings, a local reporter sidled up. "Ambitious project, Mr. Avery." "Disappointed?" Marcus managed a polite smile. "I believe in Meridian Hall's promise," he replied, "and I'm not done fighting for it." Outside the chamber's heavy oak doors, the evening sky glowed copper over the skyline. Marcus sketched Meridian Hall's silhouette into his notebook, writing beneath it 4 words that would drive him onward: denied today, rebuilt tomorrow. That evening, Marcus Avery refused to let the Planning Commission's rejection extinguish his dream. Back in his studio loft, he spread his renderings of Meridian Hall across the drafting table, its glowing atrium and riverfront promenade shimmering under desk lamps. He dialed his mentor, veteran architect Lena Soto. "They said it won't fit," he sighed. "But I know this city needs it." Lena's voice crackled with support. "Then build it without them," she challenged. Within weeks, Marcus incorporated Meridian Development Group and began pitching Meridian Hall as a public-private venture. He met with community activists in church basements, explaining how the pavilion's flexible plaza could host farmers markets, health clinics, and AIDS memorials, services the city desperately lacked. He showed local business owners how the hall would spur foot traffic and anchor evening commerce. Investors proved skeptical until Marcus secured seed funding from tech philanthropist Alicia Nguyen, who envisioned the hall as a civic innovation lab. With Nguyen's backing, he purchased a derelict brownfield on the riverbank, once slated for luxury condos, and retooled his design for adaptive reuse. He contracted engineers to reinforce the cantilever with hidden tension cables and partnered with landscape architects to restore polluted wetlands into reflective water features. As construction permits flew through under Nguyen's influence, City Hall buzzed with disbelief. The very officials who had scorned his vision now scrambled to rezone the riverfront parcel. Marcus watched cranes lift steel beams against the dusk sky, each rivet a testament to determination over denial. Meridian Hall was no longer a permit application. It was becoming the city's next landmark, built not by permission, but by purpose. The morning cranes rumbled to life before dawn, their steel arms pivoting against a rose-pink sky as Marcus Avery arrived on site in his dark sedan. Beneath his crisp suit jacket, he wore a simple denim shirt, an unspoken signal that today he was builder as much as designer. The brownfield lot sprawled before him, littered with rusted beams and broken concrete, a scar on the riverfront that whispered of abandonment and neglect. Yet, in Marcus's mind, every fractured slab and twisted rebar told a story of renewal waiting to be told. By sunrise, the site had transformed into a hive of activity. Bulldozers chewed through the topsoil, clearing weeds as tall as children. Surveyors in hard hats buzzed with radio calls, and a phalanx of apprentices, minority students from the Avery Fellowship, scurried back and forth, ferrying safety cones and sampling soil for contamination tests. Marcus strode past them, pausing to offer nods of encouragement. "This is for you," he told a young woman operating a plate compactor. "Your future work will stand on these same stones." As the first foundation pours began, concrete flowing into steel-reinforced footings, the site perimeter was under siege by critics. Opponents organized a protest at City Hall that morning, flooding social media with hashtags like "Save Our Skyline" and "Historic District Matters." Anonymous flyers appeared overnight on lampposts. Meridian Hall, eyesore on the river, and greenwashing gentrification. Local columnists penned scathing editorials, arguing that Marcus had circumvented democracy by leveraging private dollars to bypass the very processes he once decried. But Marcus had anticipated the backlash. He had arranged a lunchtime open house along the temporary wood plank walkway, inviting anyone, supporters and skeptics alike, to step onto the site. He greeted families from the adjacent neighborhood, where row houses still bore looped red lines marking earlier plans for demolition. He guided them to battered picnic tables under a stretch tent, offering sandwiches sourced from local minority-owned vendors. As children clustered around a sandbox filled with crushed brick, symbolic of transformation, Marcus explained how Meridian Hall's plazas would host job fairs, free clinics, and youth coding academies. Mid-afternoon brought the first real test of his public outreach. A delegation from the Heritage Society, staunch opponents all, stepped onto the site, glaring at rusted rebar jutting from the earth. Their chairman, a silver-haired preservationist in a tweed blazer, leveled his finger at Marcus. "You promised contextual harmony," he hissed. "Instead, you've brought modernist steel into our classical district." Marcus waited calmly as reporters jostled for position. "I promised progress," he replied, voice firm. "This site once represented the city's neglect. Meridian Hall will honor our past by creating space where every story can flourish." He gestured toward the apprentices smoothing the concrete with vibrating screeds. "These young architects, many of whom grew up blocks away, will one day lead projects of their own. Today, they learn that the best designs arise from community, never in isolation." As the sun dipped toward the river, the protesters lingered, their anger tempered by curiosity. A few strolled deeper into the lot, peering at the pilings Marcus had commissioned to support the cantilever. One, an octogenarian preservationist, racked his fingers through his hair and muttered, "I suppose it's stronger than it looks." Another pulled out her phone, photographing a row of newly planted river birches meant to soften the pavilion's edge. By evening, the construction site stood quiet under floodlights. Workers packed their tools, apprentices lingered to watch the concrete sets, and Marcus lingered last, studying the poured footings that gleamed like wet marble ribbons. He recalled the hours spent revising every joint detail to meet environmental codes, the town hall meetings where he'd argued for inclusive design, and the bitter permit hearing where his dreams had almost died. In the coming weeks, as steel beams climbed and glass panels were hoisted into place, the whispers of dissent would fade before the chorus of community events echoing across Meridian Hall's plaza. Farmers setting up in morning mist, local bands tuning guitars in the afternoon sun, and Sunday morning yoga unfolding beneath its glass canopy. And through it all, Marcus Avery would know that the true foundation of his landmark was neither concrete nor steel, but the unyielding belief that when talent meets tenacity, even the oldest prejudices must yield to the promise of progress. By midwinter, Meridian Hall's steel skeleton had become a landmark all its own, its dramatic cantilever jutting over the river like the prow of a great ship. Inside the construction trailer, Marcus Avery reviewed the latest structural reports with lead engineer Sophia Reyes and her team of specialists. Over steaming coffee, they examined sensor data on load stresses, wind shear, and thermal expansion. The numbers looked good, but Sophia's brow remained furrowed. "Marcus," she began, voice low, "the temperature swings this month have exceeded our worst-case forecasts." The primary truss is flexing near its maximum elastic limit. We're seeing hairline cracks in the weld seams. A chill ran through Marcus, despite the trailer's heaters. How serious? He asked. We have a 24-hour window to reinforce, or risk permanent structural damage, Sophia said. If the cracks propagate, the overhang could sag, or worse, fail. Marcus pushed aside his frustration. Meridian Hall was already a city symbol, far too precious to collapse into ruin. He gathered the entire engineering crew for an impromptu brainstorming session. Over headlamps and whiteboard sketches, they debated solutions. Thicker gusset plates, external support towers, hydraulic tensioners. Each proposal carried trade-offs: added weight, compromised sightlines, budget overruns. And none were trivial to implement on a half-finished site in 30 degrees Fahrenheit weather. As midnight neared, Marcus and Sophia settled on an innovative hybrid: discrete carbon fiber tension cables routed through the existing roof beams, anchored to hidden bracing inside the mechanical penthouse. The material boasted superior strength-to-weight ratios and could be installed with minimal rework. Marcus approved the emergency purchase order, and trucks arrived under floodlights with the exotic rolls of unspooled cable. Through the long night, welders and rope access technicians worked in tandem. Marcus himself climbed onto the icy steel beam overhang, safety harness cinched tight, and watched as a technician guided the cable through a bored channel. Sophia calibrated the tensioners in real time, dialing in just enough preload to neutralize the thermal stresses without overstressing the frame. At 4 a.m., the final cable snapped into place, and the laser-level gauge registered a perfect zero deflection. A tentative cheer rose among the crew, echoing across the frozen lot. Marcus let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd held, and shook hands with Sophia. "You did it," he whispered. By first light, inspectors arrived and ran ultrasonic weld scans. The cracks had closed. No new defects were detected. The cantilever stood true against the pallid dawn. As the crew collapsed into exhausted applause, Marcus looked out at the river's mist rising in the cold. Meridian Hall had passed its greatest trial, not merely through steel and concrete, but through a crucible of collaboration, innovation, and unflinching resolve. Throughout the following weeks, as interior work resumed and glass panels were carefully fitted to the soaring frame, Marcus carried the memory of that freezing night in every decision. He knew that the true test of his landmark wasn't its design alone, but its ability to endure, and to stand as proof that when adversity strikes, ingenuity and unity can transform crisis into triumph. By spring, Meridian Hall's steel and glass skeleton had given way to a fully glazed pavilion that seemed to float above the river, its public plazas inviting every passerby to step inside. Marcus Avery oversaw the inaugural Opening Week Festival, a 6-day celebration designed not merely to unveil a building, but to reknit the city's social fabric. On day one, toddlers chased bubbles across the polished concrete floor, while elders sampled lemonade beneath cantilevered shade canopies. A local jazz trio improvised among the support columns, their saxophones weaving sunlight through the atrium. On day two, Meridian Hall hosted its first City Stories exhibit in the mezzanine gallery. Dozens of large-format photographs chronicled the riverfront's history, from the smokestacks of the old mill to the vacant lots of the 1980s. Community volunteers, some wearing hard hat vests from the construction phase, took turns at lecterns sharing personal memories, factory whistle recalls, childhood fishing expeditions, and the day the planners first told Marcus his vision wouldn't fit. Visitors crowded the railings, their reflections caught in the glass walls, reminding Marcus that the building he'd fought for belonged first to the people. Midweek programming turned to civic dialogue. Amina Clark, fresh from her Supreme Court victory, moderated a Justice and Public Space panel on Meridian Hall's outdoor stage. Under a canopy of river birches, she and local activists dissected how public architecture can either exclude or empower. When a preservationist questioned the hall's modernist silhouette, a Southside youth speaker rose to describe how the open-air amphitheater offered him the first safe space to perform spoken-word poetry. Their exchange, fierce, honest, and unfiltered, was beamed live to dozens of neighborhood centers, igniting conversations in living rooms across the city. By Friday, the festival spotlight fell on the Riverfront Harvest Market, featuring immigrant farmers whose families had once struggled to find a venue for their produce. Beneath Meridian Hall's glass canopy, stalls overflowed with heirloom tomatoes, artisanal cheeses, and sweet corn grilled on open-air braziers. Marcus watched as a multi-generational crowd, from boardroom executives to school children, sampled fresh-pressed cider, trading recipes and stories. The market's success prompted City Council to allocate permanent weekly permits, ensuring Meridian Hall's plaza would remain a hub of food justice and local enterprise. On the final day, Marcus joined the Avery Fellowship Scholars in unveiling Voices in Stone, a permanent art installation embedded into the building's base. Etched quotations from community members, factory workers, artists, elders, celebrating shared history and future promise. As the sun set, floodlights bathed the inscriptions in warm glow, and guests lingered to trace the words with their fingertips. Marcus realized that Meridian Hall had evolved far beyond a landmark. It had become a living archive of the city's triumphs and traumas, a space where beauty and reckoning coexisted. In the light of that festival's close, he understood that true architecture does not simply shelter people. It elevates their voices, carries their stories, and demands that every brick and every beam bear witness to both the past and the promise of what can rise when a community dares to build together. The morning after Meridian Hall's festival-filled opening week dawned crisp and clear, yet in the hushed halls of City Hall a tempest was brewing. Marcus Avery arrived to find a summons waiting on his desk, a lawsuit filed by Heritage Conservancy International, alleging that Meridian Hall's modernist design violated the city's Historic District Preservation Act. The complaint sought an injunction to halt all programming until a full design review could be conducted, and threatened daily fines of $25,000 for any unauthorized events. Marcus felt the old sting of bureaucratic rebuke, but this time he was prepared. He convened his legal counsel, civil rights litigator Julia Montes and zoning expert Raphael Chen, in the glass-walled conference room overlooking the river. They pored over the Preservation Act's text, cross-referencing decades of precedent on contextual harmony and visual continuity. Julia spoke first, firm and unyielding. They're weaponizing preservation to stifle public access. We'll file a motion to intervene under the public trust doctrine, arguing this is city property held for the people. Within 48 hours, their response was on file. The motion detailed Meridian Hall's genesis in community petition, its alignment with the city's master plan, and the urgent public need for free civic space. It also invoked the National Historic Preservation Act's Section 106, noting that adaptive reuse projects entirely merit special exemptions when they serve a compelling public interest, and that Meridian Hall's unobtrusive steel and glass silhouette actually echoes the Art Deco geometry of neighboring landmarks. As the injunction hearing approached, local advocates rallied in force. Chicano muralists, immigrant rights groups, and disability justice activists submitted amicus briefs lauding Meridian Hall's universal design features: tactile wayfinding strips, ramp-integrated terraces, sign language video kiosks, and a quiet room for neurodiverse visitors. A chorus of voices, from farmers whose markets depended on the plaza to seniors' centers that used the rooftop gardens for therapy, testified to the hall's indispensable role in neighborhood life. On a brisk March morning, Judge Elena Ramirez presided over the injunction hearing in a packed courtroom. The plaintiff's counsel, a polished preservation attorney, unfurled historical photographs of the adjacent 1920s civic buildings and argued that Meridian Hall's minimalist facade clashed irreparably with the district's character. His voice echoed against the high ceilings as he pleaded for a temporary moratorium. When Marcus took the stand, he spoke without notes. "Your Honor, I stand here not as an outsider, but as part of the city's living tapestry. Meridian Hall was born of public demand for a space to convene, to heal, and to celebrate our differences. To halt its operation now is to undo the very promise of civic engagement we were sworn to uphold." He gestured to the gallery, where community members, many wearing Meridian Hall t-shirts, looked on expectantly. I challenge you to name a single court ruling that would deprive seniors of free exercise classes, entrepreneurs of an accessible marketplace, or students of an after-school STEM lab merely because the building isn't stone. The courtroom fell silent. As Judge Ramirez conferred with her clerk, a sense of gravity enveloped the hall. This was not merely about architecture, but about who gets to shape and use public space. 20 minutes later, she returned. I find that the plaintiffs have failed to demonstrate a likelihood of irreparable harm, she announced, and that Meridian Hall's public benefit far outweighs any speculative aesthetic discord. The motion for injunction is denied. Outside, cheers erupted in the hallway as Marcus and his team embraced. Press photographers swarmed, court back's modern civic landmark read newspaper headlines. Even the plaintiff's attorney extended a courteous nod, acknowledging defeat. But the skirmish did more than affirm Meridian Hall's legality. It galvanized an official, citywide accessibility review. Under Mayor Whitcomb's executive order, every public building would undergo an audit for universal design, accessibility, and community programming. Meridian Hall, long the guinea pig for inclusive features, was designated as the model site. Architects, engineers, and disability rights advocates toured its ramps, tested its hearing loop systems, and praised its multi-sensory wayfinding. Within months, retrofits began on century-old courthouses, libraries, and transit hubs. Braille signage installed, elevators upgraded, restrooms refitted for all bodies. A city ordinance codifying a Meridian standard mandated that any new public-private partnership project incorporate at least 3 of Meridian Hall's accessibility features or face withholding of permits. Back at Meridian Hall's plaza, Marcus watched as families with strollers, once deterred by curb cuts too steep, now glided through the entrances. A young man in a wheelchair beamed as he navigated the subtitles on the live-captioned lecture in the outdoor amphitheater. Nearby, a group of non-English speakers used the hall's translation kiosks to access an interfaith community dialogue. In the quiet of his office that evening, Marcus scrolled through emails from other cities requesting guidance on their own adaptive reuse and accessibility initiatives. He replied to each with a single line: share your vision. Never let precedent dictate possibility. As dusk fell and the hall's lights shimmered like beacon lanterns on the river, Marcus realized that Meridian Hall's true triumph was not simply the denial of an injunction, but the awakening of a city to the principle that public space must be both beautiful and accessible. In every new ramp installed, every kiosk deployed, he saw the deep reverberations of a landmark that began as a dream denied and grew into a testament that justice, like architecture, must stand open to all. 5 years after the first steel beam was raised, Meridian Hall had become more than an architectural landmark. It was the city's beating heart. On a crisp autumn morning, a bronze plaque bearing Marcus Avery's name glinted in the sun as he stepped onto the plaza for the annual Founders Festival. Around him, families picnicked on the rooftop gardens he had insisted remained freely accessible. Children raced along the reflecting pool's edge, and local artisans sold handmade wares under the hall's shade canopy. The very benches he had designed to seat strangers side by side now held friends who had met over open-air lectures and weekend farmers markets. As the crowd swelled toward the river's edge, Marcus walked among them, pausing to shake hands with the Avery Fellowship scholars who now staffed the hall's community programs. One of them, a young woman from his first cohort, guided a group through a VR installation that layered Meridian Hall's CAD models over the original brownfield site, letting visitors witness the transformation in real time. Another led a workshop on universal design, teaching seniors how to navigate the wayfinding kiosks he had championed 5 winters earlier. Each delighted smile and nod of understanding reminded Marcus that his dream had taken root in unexpected hands and blossomed into a collective achievement. Midday brought the ceremonial ribbon cutting for the hall's newest addition, a glass-walled pavilion dedicated to public art. Funded by corporate partners, bound under the Meridian standard he'd helped codify. Inside, a rotating exhibition of neighborhood murals, once hidden behind scaffoldings, now stretched across soaring walls, their vibrant colors echoing stories of resilience and hope. As Marcus stepped forward, he recalled the planning meetings where preservationists had scoffed at his modern vision. Today, those same skeptics stood in applause, many wiping tears as the muralists spoke of how Meridian Hall had given them a permanent voice. As sunset painted the steel facade gold, Marcus climbed to the rooftop overlook, his first true quiet moment in months. Below, the plaza's LED strips flickered to life, outlining the hall's signature cantilever against the darkening sky. He thought of every hurdle, the permit denial that sparked his private campaign, the midnight cable retrofit that saved the overhang, the injunction battle that affirmed public trust, and the countless community meetings that turned opposition into ownership. In that twilight hush, he understood that Meridian Hall's enduring legacy was not measured in square footage or annual foot traffic, but in the countless lives it had touched and the promise it stood for, that when one person refuses to accept no, they can reshape not only a skyline, but the very soul of a city.